Good day, fellow aluminium industry enthusiasts. You know, the global aluminium value chain has been experiencing immense volatility for quite some time now. And as a result, the producers, the traders, and the consumers are feeling the heat of it all across the globe. Today, we have with us Dr. Josef Nierling, the Managing Director, CEO of Porsche Consulting Italy, who I'm confident will aid our audience in navigating through the difficult times, the uncertainties of the aluminium and the peripheral industries. European and global manufacturers are facing elevated energy costs, carbon pricing exposure, and supply chain volatility. From your recent engagements, where are industrial companies still structurally inefficient? And what are your quickest levers, do you think, to restore this competitiveness?
Thank you for the question and for inviting me. So actually, you're right. The current energy situation is highly complex, and many companies are under pressure in this moment for the increasing costs and risks. We know in these days about the Iran war and the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. These are the latest examples of international energy exposure. So more broadly, if we see the energy segment, so we can see a huge difference between geographic regions and even within Europe, from one country to the other. This largely depends on each country's energy mix. Some countries benefit from abundant oil and gas. Other have invested heavily in nuclear power. Think about in Europe about France, or other again in renewables. And so energy actually demand, of course, it's a variable depending on the sector. So, but industries such metals or chemicals are, as we know, particularly sensitive on that. And as a result, in the years, the global manufacturing footprints of leading players, but also the supplier base, have shifted geographically according to the cost of energy. So, but overall, so if we speak about the green transition in Europe and the carbon pricing mechanism of the ETS, or the certificates, the emission trading system, this just was an accelerator of this dynamics. You asked me about industries or companies that are less inefficient. So paradoxically, we can see that the greatest inefficiency are in countries and industries where energy costs are low. While in high-cost energy environments, there is a much strong focus on efficiency. So today, technologies like continuous monitoring, optimization, even also today supported by AI, give significant potential on in efficiency in energy. So overall, in Europe also there is a lot of attention on the new generation nuclear plants, so the small ones. But this technology will come maybe in 10 years. So in the short term, at the end, we can be more focused on energy consumption and maybe renegotiating supplier contracts, entering long-term purchase agreement, or even invest in self-generation. These are the major measures.
With mechanisms like EU CBAM reshaping the trade economics, how prepared are heavy industries, particularly energy intensive sectors like aluminium, in measuring, verifying, and reducing Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions? Where are companies underestimating the challenges?
So perhaps the biggest blind spot of companies is that the fact that carbon pricing is entering in the new era of commercial negotiations is not about sustainability and sustainability reports. So as we know, this carbon board adjustment mechanism is now in force since January this year. And it's not a national tax. It's a real international trade regulation mechanisms that turns CO2 into a cost at the border. So it's at the end, its purpose is to align pricing and competitiveness between foreign producers and local producers who are subject to the ATS system, to the emission trading system inside Europe. So for energy intensive industries, such metals, this can translate in that double-digit risk on margins. It's a very delicate question. So most energy intensive players internationally are capable of estimating scope 1, scope 2 emission, but at an aggregate level. The point is that this new regulation goes in deep, and its need of granularity, verificability, decision usefulness. That's different to reporting and to have the data on an aggregate level, as I mentioned before. So we have to see that this CBAM system requires an installation level, so a plant level data analysis, product specific, and also that has to be, it is possible to be verified under these EU MRV, so monitor, reporting, and verification rules. So not many companies are prepared on that. And also, if we have a proper system to monitor this data, then we can really compensate it, for example, with the Indian CCTS system. But if this transparency of the numbers is not there, then the default EU values will be more punitive. So if it's estimated just at a aggregate level, there is a big risk on this. So at the end, we can say that what we don't have to underestimate, so the company has not to underestimate, is the quality of data, because this traduce into real cash outflows in the future.
Industry 4.0 has been discussed for over a decade now. In your implementation work, what differentiates companies that genuinely extract ROI from digitalization and from those that remain stuck in pilot mode?
For the specific question, thank you very much, because Porsche Consulting is strongly focused on this topic. We work on Industry 4.0 and smart technology since more than 10 years. And for us, the answer to your question is very clear. So you should not start from the technology itself, but from the competitive advantage you want to achieve. So, for example, lower costs, better demand forecasting, or shorter delivery time. It has to be clear what's the purpose of this transformation, from the digital transformation. And from there, then you design an integrated system that built to serve this specific need that you detected. So today, we see the same pattern repeating with artificial intelligence, with the new generation of robotics, for example, the humanoids. There is a lot of hype. Many companies are experimenting with these technologies, which is perfectly fine, as long as you don't expect an impact in your profit and loss. But if the goal is a step change in productivity, in results, in the profit and loss, then the focus again must be on the system and not on technology.
For capital intensive sectors such as metals, automotive, and industrial goods, how should leadership teams rethink capex strategy in an era of geopolitical fragmentation and uncertain demand cycles?
That's an important question, and I have to say that this a clear pattern on this. So this geopolitical fragmentation is driving the big companies to a local for local strategy. So in practice, large multinationals, for example, in automotive sector, are increasingly organizing themselves around three relatively independent poles, hubs, one in the Americas, one in Europe, and one in Asia. So each of these hubs develops local products, uh, of course, for addressing specific market needs, but also to incorporate the dominant technologies. For example, the software system, think about, again, the automotive sector, And also manufacturing is also increasing following this strategy because it's designed that the footprint today around geographies because of tariffs. So the new industrial footprint will lead really to resize in some regions and then significant investment in other regions, in new regions, with really a dominant independency of these poles. And in this period of transformation, we strongly suggest to suppliers of large international players to stay close to their customer, close physically, but also in the relationship. So it's a very important moment.
Automation and AI are accelerating, yet industrial labor shortages persist. In practical terms, what organizational changes are required to align workforce capability with digital transformation?
Yeah. As I mentioned with Industry 4.0, there are many new technologies that are emerging. The artificial intelligence, autonomous automation, the hype of humanoids, all this will bring flexibility, will be a step change. But I have to say that technology enables technology. We don't have to be scared about the complexity that we are creating in this production system because technologies will become more and more user friendly. So I would not be really concerned about the digital training and this upskilling of the people. The real challenge is actually attract talents that can see how these technologies can be translated into applications with real, tangible profit and loss impact. So these are the talents that we have to attract in our companies. And overall, to build a workforce that has this strong, we say, learning agility, the capability to learn new and new skills, because the future generation of workers will go through multiple role transition in their careers. So the ability to adapt will be the critical success factor.
In sectors like primary metals or advanced materials, where margins are often cyclical, what operational discipline separates the top quartile performers from the rest?
Yes, we are witnessing a significant cyclical dynamics in the economy. For example, the slowdown of the automotive sector in Europe. So the difference between the top performers, as you mentioned it, it's about operational discipline. So for our most recent experience with companies, three factors are really important. First, a rigorous, structured approach to the costs. So what we call operational excellence. So the best company design the organization to survive to these down cycles, not to maximize just the up cycles. They are really strong on managing flexibility in costs, in assets, in capacity. And it's not about just incremental efficiency, just little improvements or continuous improvement. It's really a structured approach. I think this is one even of the most requested consulting services by us. And the second is data-driven decisions on product mix, on asset utilization. Today, we have, through technologies, the capacity to be more able to predict the cycles, to reallocate capacity, also to shift commercial priorities. So at the end, to adapt to these cycles, even before it is visible in the profit and loss statements. So this is very important. And the third is, of course, the capital discipline. So in investments, in maintenance, working capital, that also has to uh, uh, be made in a clever mode, very strategically. So in downtowns, like today, as I mentioned, for example, in the automotive, it's not about freezing everything, but on investing selectively, strategically. And of course, in upturns that we hope to assist soon, this is not about chasing just volume at any cost, but be really strategic in this sense.
Secondary aluminium production is gaining strategic importance amid decarbonization pressures. This is most probably the only question that we have around secondary aluminium, and I think it's a very important one. Do you see scrap access becoming the next competitive moat in aluminium? How should primary producers rethink their positioning in the recycling value chain?
Yeah. So, of course, today still depends heavily on the market situation. For example, in Europe and India, there are different standpoints, and we are in a different scrap adoption curve, let's say. So, in Europe, scrap access is really a strategic constraint. For us, with high ETS prices in Europe, the customer are demanding verified low carbon aluminium, access to high quality scrap. This is a problem that the quality of the scrap is really a critical point. And then this is real, as you mentioned, a competitive mode. So in some case, it's also a barrier to entry if we see for new or incumbent players. So if you compare, for example, in India, the scrap still plays a secondary role today. Competitiveness is largely driven by primary production and captive energy. But so at the moment, it seems that the role is of the recycling of aluminium is seen as an efficiency level or something that help the core of the production. But the gap is closing faster with exporters exposed in Europe because we have discussed it at the beginning of our conversation about the new trading rules. So for primary producers today, the implication is clear. You have to build up the capacity to access to recycling and no longer treat this as an add-on, but embed this as a core industry strategy. So for Europe, it's to defend competitiveness today. In India, is to secure the access of tomorrow low carbon markets.